Everyone's been talking about prompt engineering. Prompt engineering. Is it cool? Is it necessary? Is it going to go away? But here's the dirty little secret about prompting LLMs.
Steve Jobs said he sees a computer as being like a bicycle for the mind. What I think AI is it's a freaking race car for the mind.
And Anthropic was asked, like, what makes your models truly different? And what the CPO said was really, really striking.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode.
All right, on this week's show, we're going to talk about OpenAI acquiring Jony Ive, basically, for $6 billion, billion with a B. We're going to tell you all about it, what it means, why they did it, and why it actually exposes some essential vulnerability in the company. And maybe it's something Apple and Google can exploit in the future. We're going to talk about Claude 4, the cutting-edge new model from Anthropic, which does some incredible agentic stuff that we've never seen before, and also what the chief product officer had to say about how Claude is different than OpenAI, Gemini, and all the other models out there. We're going to talk about Klarna and their AI customer support team. Remember, they fired everyone and replaced them with AI bots. We're going to check in with how that's going. Spoiler alert, it's not going very well. We'll tell you why and what they're doing instead. And then finally, we're going to talk about Bitcoin at an all-time high. We'll tell you why, what happens next, and what you can do to profit from it.
Holy shit, you guys. OpenAI just announced the most expensive hire in history. $6.5 billion for one man.
That's right, Yaniv. This is crazy, crazy news. So let's talk about it in detail here. For our first topic, we want to talk about what else but OpenAI and Sam Altman falling in love with, purchasing Jony Ive's company, IO, for $6 billion, billion with a B, as well as signing a deal for Love From, which is Jony Ive's design firm, to run all of OpenAI's design. So the idea here is that Sam and Jony have been collaborating for a few years on a AI device in a company called IO. And apparently Sam's been trying to woo Jony over for a while and go, hey, why don't you just do this inside OpenAI? And the time has come. The announcement was like a wedding announcement. They kind of signed the deal, tied the knot in a beautiful love letter video to San Francisco. And they're teasing some crazy, next-gen device over the next, call it 12, 18 months. Yaniv, I think you saw the love video, the love story video.
Oh, well, I saw the Love website, which has got, very much looks like a wedding announcement. Even, the letter is like narrow and centered. It just doesn't look like a corporate website. It's got this black and white photo with Jony leaning his head into Sam's head with his arm around him. And yeah, it's weird vibes for sure. First of all, some people have said this is the most expensive acqui-hire in history, which is basically OpenAI has paid $6.5 billion as a signing bonus to Jony Ive in order to get him on board. I think that's kind of true. IO doesn't really have any product. Remember, as you said a couple of times, Chris, it's an all-stock deal. That means that, that they're not getting money. Basically, another way of thinking about this, Chris, is it's kind of like Jony Ive is being brought in as a late co-founder. That comes in sometimes. The startup may have been around for a couple of years, but then someone is brought in who is so important to the company that they get a lot of stock and a co-founder title. And I nearly feel that's what's happening, is that Sam's like, oh, I want this guy in the company as effectively an owner. And so he's getting, it's basically a 2% dilution for OpenAI. So you could say that IO is getting a 2% ownership stake in OpenAI, and whatever share Jony had in IO is now his stock holding. And so I really think that is the right way to think of it. Now that I reflect, Chris, is it's basically Jony Ive coming in as a late co-founder to OpenAI. And it's a recognition from Sam and I guess from the board and everyone else that for OpenAI to thrive, they really need to start to think about hardware devices, to start to think about distribution. It actually speaks a little bit to their vulnerability, which I'd like to come back to. But just one thought, Chris, and then I'll ping pong it back to you, is that I'm actually coincidentally in the middle of reading Walter Isaacson's famous biography of Steve Jobs. Even the photo reminds me of the cover art of that, the cover photography. And, obviously Jony Ive being at Apple. But I reckon what Sam is trying to channel is the early days of Apple, right? Where he's Jobs and Jony Ive is Steve Wozniak, something like that, right? Where they're like, okay, how are we going to make this revolutionary company that is aesthetic and into beauty and not just ChatGPT? And that's what this whole thing feels like.
Yeah, I think Your observation about late co-founder is a really astute one, and I haven't heard that take from anywhere else. So you heard it here exclusively on the Startup Podcast.
Heard it here first.
I think it's a really beautiful and elegant way of putting it. You could say they have no product. We don't know what they have under the covers, but they certainly don't have a real product in market. What they're really buying is pedigree, access to quite a storied history, and as you said, they are making not so subtle allusions to that history with photos that look like Steve Jobs and so on. They're buying a design aesthetic and a design philosophy. And I would say more than that, they're just buying a brand philosophy, a brand philosophy that's very, very human. I think Jony Ive's obsession with humanity. And if you're going to build the definitive non-biological intelligence, you probably want to put humanity at the center of your brand. With a device that may be successful or may not, they might be buying some degree of distribution, physical distribution that Google or Apple enjoy for free at the moment. I do notice that Jony talked a lot about values and his alignment of values with Sam. And he emphasized certain words that I would not have attributed to Steve Jobs. I would have attributed them to be in contrast with Steve Jobs. Things like kindness and putting people first. I felt like they were pointed, or I felt like they were intentional. All of the imagery was sort of pointing at this is the next Steve Jobs and the next Apple. But there was a little bit of daylight or a little bit of intentional pointing to saying, Apple was one thing, but I think Sam is more of a humanist and more of a humble soul.
Well, let me disagree with you a little bit there, Chris, because, I think, sure, Steve Jobs is famous for his outbursts and the way he treated people and so on. But again, I'm in the thick of the biography. And if you think about the history of Apple and Steve's philosophy for Apple and its products, it was extremely humanistic. And he always portrayed Apple as being about the user and about the person, in contrast to IBM and Microsoft and, these sort of evil empire corporate types. So I actually think it's very much in that pedigree. With this, they're saying, we want to be the Apple of AI, because Apple sure as hell isn't being the Apple of AI, so we're going to do it.
To be clear, what I'm talking about is he was talking about Sam as a person. But you're correct that together Jony and Steve imbued the technology world with a humanness that was missing and continues to be missing in a lot of places. So yeah, Steve Jobs was this very dichotomous person where he had maybe a little less patience for the humans in his life, but more patience for the humans that would use his products. And I felt like there's a bit of a contrast there, at least in the messaging. To the point of this is the new Apple. Yeah, I mean, Apple, this is right. The timing is amazing, right? It was an acquisition of a company called I.O. on the second day of Google I.O. So it sort of short sheets the news cycle for Google. And it's in the middle of a period where Apple is seen to be faltering in AI. And so it was in this beautiful sweet spot of PR goodness where OpenAI could steal the limelight for a moment. And so it's very shrewd. Sam Altman, for all of his outward appearance of humbleness and thoughtfulness, is an incredibly, incredibly shrewd guy. And I think that's worth noting.
Absolutely. I just wanted to add one thing here, Chris, is I was going to say there's also an element of desperation in this move from OpenAI, but I've reconsidered. I don't want to use the word desperation. I want to use the word vulnerability because, when we talk about a person being vulnerable, it can be seen as a sign of weakness, but also it can be seen as a sign of humility and self-knowledge. And I like that dichotomy here, Chris, which is OpenAI is a $350 billion company or something like that. But we talked just last week when we were covering the Google I.O. announcements and the huge advantages Google have in terms of distribution and capital depth and all sorts of things in winning this AI war. OpenAI, for all its massive strength, there is a world in which they are 5 years down the track, they're roadkill, right? They're the early leader, they're Alta Vista, they're Netscape, and they get run over by the Magnificent Seven. And so I think saying, hey, we are big and we are strong, but we are also vulnerable. And therefore, we need to make bold moves in acknowledgement of that vulnerability and not be complacent in any way, not value our equity more highly, more safely than it is. I think that's actually a really interesting thing here, where OpenAI, in a sense, by giving away so much equity to bring one person on, and of course there is his team, and of course maybe there's some stuff under development, but it's them saying, yeah, we're in the lead here, but we actually have a bunch of structural disadvantages. This game is far from one, and it's worth making bold bets with our equity to reduce the chance that that happens.
I think that is just such a beautiful, elegant word for the situation. They are vulnerable. And they appear to be aware of that vulnerability and acting with alacrity to plug those holes. The question you have to ask yourself is, does this 2% equity dilution increase the value of the company by more than 2%? If not immediately, then over the fullness of time. And I think the answer will either be sort of 0 or 1, right? Either it will be roadkill, or Jony Ive will be contributing to some of the brand and device transformation that will see this company become massive in the long term, remain massive and get bigger. It is worth noting that Sam told his team in an all hands that they expect to sell 100 million of these devices in the short to medium term, which is, by iPhone numbers, relatively trivial, but for a new device, relatively meaningful. And that this could push OpenAI to be a $1 trillion company. It's also worth noting that Apple's stock dropped on the news. It's not unrelated to the fact that Love From is essentially the best of Apple design during the Steve Jobs era. I mean, Jony Ive obviously was the chief design officer there. When he left, he then poached his successor and his mentee into his own company. So he kind of gutted Apple design for a moment there. Now, this was a little while ago, so Apple, I'm sure, has recovered. But this is like taking the old school Apple design team with Steve Jobs' legacy in hand and applying it to OpenAI as part of this Love From design deal, design contract, and then taking Jony Ive's love child for the device that they have already and acquiring it into OpenAI. So, well, the device they presumably have. I think it's a master stroke in plugging a real vulnerability, but it's not a panacea. The distribution, the balance sheet, the momentum is the differences between a Google and an Apple are really real.
Actually, just one more thought on this, Chris. We talked about the fact that this is about going into hardware. Now, going into hardware is hard. And speaking of roadkill, the roads are littered with big attempts, expensive attempts at introducing hardware to the market that failed. We talked about the Facebook Home just last week, right? The idea that they wanted distribution through hardware. Of course, there's Microsoft Zune, Windows Mobile. There is the Humane Pin more recently, and the Rabbit, all of these things, the Amazon Fire Phone, of course, right? So the point is, bringing good hardware to market is both expensive and really, really hard to get right. So I think another way of looking at this is that if OpenAI really wants to put a piece of hardware out there, whether it's a phone or some other device, they really need to get it right. And it's much harder to get it right than get it wrong. So you better have the best designer in the world if you want to take on Apple, if you want to take on Google and Samsung and all of these other folks and have a realistic chance of winning. So, that's, I think, another thing where they're thinking, okay, investing in hardware is a big enough investment that another 2% dilution is part of that investment.
Yeah, and it's worth noting as well, when you're a first-time or low-scale hardware producer, you have a lot of disadvantages just in terms of supply chain and unit economics. Just massive disadvantages. I've been watching a little bit of the videos from the company Nothing, that make the Nothing phone and Nothing earbuds, and they have this kind of ragtag rebellion aesthetic of like telling you all of their secrets and how they think about the world and reacting to the iPhone and talking about their supply chain concerns and all this kind of stuff. And he's, very transparent, or, at least that's the vibe. And he talks about just the natural advantages that Apple has over them because of their gigantic supply chain and volume discounts and
economies of scale.
Yeah, it's massive. And so these Nothing guys, they've been around for a while and they're nowhere near closing that gap. So I wouldn't, thinking about it out loud here, I wouldn't be surprised if a OpenAI device isn't a partnership with a Samsung or with a Huawei or something. I think that would be actually quite clever to bootstrap their scale. All right, so those are our thoughts about the OpenAI acquisition of IO, the acqui-hire, the $6 billion partnership with Jony Ive. What do you guys think? Join us in the comments and let us know your thoughts.
The next bit of news is Anthropic's announcement of Claude 4. Chris, I don't want us to necessarily cover every single new model update, but there's a couple of interesting things here. So Anthropic have announced their new Claude 4 models, both Opus and Sonnet. They feature major upgrades in reasoning, coding, long context performance. It can handle complex tasks for hours with the 200,000 token context window, improved memory, and the ability to use tools in parallel. The highlights are better reliability, faster performance, stronger safety measures. Here's the thing that really stood out to me, Chris. Yes, okay, here's the next model, the next state of the model. But if you look at Anthropic's announcement, it is all about writing code. And it nearly feels to me that, and this is a major version number change, right? So this feels to me like Anthropic are actually pivoting their strategy a little bit and doubling down on coding, right? For a long time, the Claude models have been well known for their excellent prose, for the fact that they write better copy than perhaps OpenAI or Google's models do. But everything I've heard coming from them lately has been about the ability of these models to write code, where they're also leading. And I think this is fascinating. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, that coding seems to be, the area where there's the greatest opportunity to, I guess, move the needle, but also there's this sort of recursive attribute to it, right? Which is if you have the best model for coding, you can use that model to help you develop the next model, right? So it's that exponentials and exponentials, as you like to talk about, Chris. And so I think it's really interesting. They've not officially said, hey, we're about building models for coding. It's still a general purpose model. You can use Claude for other things. But the fact that everything they talk about is about how it can be used for developing software, I think is a fascinating development.
Yeah, I think that's right. So not only does making the smartest coding LLM help you build the next smartest LLM, it potentially positions you as the best LLM for creating apps or applets or code on the fly for your end users. And so if your LLM is able to generate bespoke code, bespoke applets, bespoke disposable ephemeral AI apps, you heard that name here first, then your LLM almost becomes by default better at everything because it's better at generating, things that you need on the fly. I was blown away by the chief product officer of Anthropic. I think he was on CNBC, and someone asked him, hey, how do you think about this landscape? You've got Google and Gemini and OpenAI and ChatGPT and Claude and from Anthropic. And, how do you guys differentiate? How do you think about this space? And I thought he said something quite astute. I don't know if these are exactly right characterizations, but this is the way he framed it. And I thought it was a clever way of doing it. Google sort of seems to be really optimizing around response times. They're very much about these one-shot transactional, give me a search, give me a result. I need to know what's happening. It's very Google-like. He's saying OpenAI seems to be optimizing for multimodal, voice, video, audio, and so on. And we're really optimizing for a long-lived agentic workflows. So you give us one prompt and we can go off not for minutes, but for hours and hours and hours and work over complex tasks. And coding is just an example of that ability to load a huge context window and execute without hallucination, without distraction, without derailment for long periods of time. Now, again, I don't know if that's true. Google's doing a lot of great multimodal stuff. OpenAI is doing a lot of reasoning stuff. But it was a good attempt at casting a distinction between the three approaches.
Well, I think it's more interesting as a window into how Anthropic are thinking about themselves, right? And yes, they are about task execution and particular coding. So they're leaning into software development, into the agentic side of things. And I wonder, Chris, we were talking about OpenAI's vulnerability. Of course, Anthropic are a whole lot more vulnerable. They're smaller, right? They're Lyft to OpenAI's Uber. And I wonder if they're actually sort of trying to carve out a bit of a specialization so that they can be part of a gigantic acquisition at some point, because it feels a bit difficult to see Anthropic staying fully independent indefinitely in this just hyper-capitalized AI foundation model world.
Yeah, well, that's the way he's positioning things. We'll see what happens. Anyway, those are our thoughts. Those are the chief product officer's thoughts at Anthropic. What do you guys think? Jump in the comments and let us know. Another huge story is what Klarna has done with their AI customer support team. They've done something that nobody really expected. They were famous for cutting pretty much most of their customer support team and saying, hey, AI can do this now. We're going to just eliminate all these jobs and hand it over to AI. But they've just recently sort of done a mea culpa, and they started hiring customer service back, more humans back into customer service. And if you don't know, Klarna, by the way, is like a buy now, pay later platform, right? So you buy now and pay it off in 4 easy payments or whatever. This is interesting by itself. Is AI really going to replace customer service jobs in the short term? You still need to have a human, AI hybrid workforce, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it also has a deeper implication for replacing SaaS apps, traditional, algorithm or rules-based SaaS apps with this non-deterministic LLM type model. It's not clear to me that this is the best answer to most or many or some of the use cases that people are using it for. We're all used to software that does the same thing every time. And there is a little bit of a race to like replace all of that deterministic software with software that is kind of probabilistic and kind of sort of does whatever it wants at any given time. And I think that's going to start to bite people in the ass in some use cases for some features, for some products, some of the time. And I think that sum is larger than people think. And it's probably going to see us do a little bit of rolling back of the AI euphoria in the short to medium term. What do you think, Yaniv? What does this move by Klarna really mean, and what is this this determinism versus probabilistic software? Does it really have an impending doom painted on its back?
Yeah, I don't know, Chris. Like, I feel this is hubris for Klarna. I wouldn't want to over-index on that one point. Like, they came out swinging earlier. They're like, AI is better than people. We'll just fire everyone. And now they've had to eat a bit of humble pie. So sucks to them. Arrogance is rewarded with its correct reward. But, I guess the broader point here is that I think using AI, which is non-deterministic software, as you say, is a new competency. So I would say probably what happened with Klarna is they simply got ahead of their skis and they weren't good at using it yet, right? And again, I'm seeing in the AI software development world, the multiple iterations of how you actually use this stuff effectively. One of the things that I'm seeing is that there's been this interesting roller coaster with prompt engineering, Chris. I remember when ChatGPT first came out with GPT-3 and all of these pundits were pronouncing that prompt engineering is a future profession, future career, and so on. And then there was this sort of, I guess it's sort of a hype cycle, isn't it, right? And people were like, prompt engineering is bullshit. It's just a sort of temporary gap, temporary kind of band-aid over the fact that these models aren't good enough and it's nonsense. And here's what I think now, Chris, is that prompt engineering or just prompting, the art of prompting these things is making a major comeback. And in these coding tools, they have things called rules, right? Which are basically prompts that are selectively executed when, for example, I want to write a unit test. You have a whole bunch of instructions written in a prompt to the model in order to make sure it writes a unit test the way you want it to. It's basically documentation. And I wonder, I think customer support people are acting mostly deterministically. If you give the AI model the right prompting and then also the right tool integration and so on, I think it can do an incredible job. But just in the same way that, and if anybody's ever stood up a customer support team, you will know it is not easy to get people to act in a way that is both customer-centric and follows business rules and whatnot, and is, low cost. There's a lot of complexity there. There's a lot of training. There's lots of enablement that goes into it. And the same goes for AIs, right? So I think that's the difference, which is when you use deterministic software, there's a lot of work to create the software, and then the deployment is relatively straightforward. With non-deterministic software, you have to tell it what to do. The deployment is the hard part. And I think probably that's what Klarna underestimated.
Yeah, you're right. Everyone's been talking about prompt engineering. Is it cool? Is it necessary? Is it going to go away? But here's the dirty little secret about prompting LLMs. It's not just LLMs that need to be prompted. People need to be prompted. I'll take a step back here. A long time ago, I went to the movie theater with my brother and he was like, hey, do you want some popcorn? We should get some drinks. And I'm like, yeah, sure, let's get some popcorn. And then he started sort of like digging through his pockets or whatever. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm Googling for the movie ticket stub. And I just started laughing. I was like, Google. He was searching for the movie ticket stub, right? And so he was kind of used the word Google as a proxy for search. And I've noticed people started using the word prompting for people. He's like, can you give me what the prompt is for this? Or you make sure you prompt them in the right way. And it occurs to me that we prompt people all the time, and the way you prompt them changes their behavior dramatically. So let me give you a very concrete example of this. If you say to a lawyer, is there any risk in doing X? The lawyer will say, yes, here's all the reasons not to do X. Because that's their responsibility. That's their duty of care. If you say to them, we are doing X, I need you to limit the risks of the downside from X, then they will help you figure out how to limit the risk downsides of X. And the conversation is radically different. And for most people, most of the time, most teams, most well-meaning operators, the first prompt will derail them from going down that path. They go, oh shit, that's a lot of risk. The second prompt will engage in a conversation of minimizing risk and executing the thing anyway. The same is true for LLMs. And the problem with this, or the opportunity with this, is that most people, most of the time, do not know how to ask the right question and do not know how to craft the right prompts for each other, much less of the universe or for LLMs. And so all the way back to our age-old debate, discussion, passion, Yaniv, you and I, it ends up being about craft, taste, judgment, experience.
And communication.
And communication. I love that. And so the very best operators become even better. They become superheroes. While the people who struggle with all of these things, including communication, sadly get left behind. And so we need, just to go on a bit of a rant there for a second, our education system needs to catch up here. And our kids need to be taught how to think about thinking, how to think about prompting, how to think about asking the right questions of the universe, much less LLMs, to become effective operators in this new world.
I agree. And, the way to think about AI tooling is imagine you've got an army of 1,000 super knowledgeable, super smart, but not particularly clever, not particularly sensible junior employees, right? And if you know how to leverage those, if you know how to instruct those junior employees to do the things you want them to do, you get superpowers. But if you just give them vague tasks, they will go and execute them, because we know that AI lacks humility, right? That's what all the hallucination and stuff is about, right? If you give it vague instructions, they will execute those vague instructions. But in the vagueness, in the lack of specificity, you will find a lot of undesirable behavior. So yes, it is in the prompting. And we talked about communication, Chris. Just one thing I wanted to add, which is it's increasingly about written communication. So we're actually, in the next few weeks, we're releasing an episode of the Startup Podcast EDU with an ex-executive at Amazon who wrote a whole book about their PRFAQ written communication process. Amazon is famous for writing things down. I think writing things down from early on is becoming more and more important, because that is how you feed the context into the LLMs that allows them to give you those superpowers. So again, everything old is new again. I think written documentation is sexy again.
Yeah, and just good old communication is useful again. We can't, all the internet abbreviations and memes and all of the illiterate kids who only know how to talk in TikTok. It's problematic. Now, we may, in a few years' time, we may look back at this episode and realize, oh my God, we're such old fuddy-duddies. Our AIs are deeply intuitive, deeply predictive of our needs and behaviors, deeply able to read between the lines and be, great adversarial debaters, discussers, and operators. And this episode will date very poorly, but we'll see. At least in the short to medium term, this is very much true.
So we're just talking about how the education system really needs to get up to date and help people become the sorts of people who can control AIs, who can instruct and prompt and leverage AIs. But I was drawn to this story that's come out about the amount of people using ChatGPT, students using ChatGPT in the education system. This is a report that came out from Axios. It talks about the fact that 90% of college students used AI tools like ChatGPT for assignments as early as January 2023. Among teens, usage has doubled since then. Now 25% of them are using ChatGPT for assignments. Frankly, I think that's an underestimate. Schools are trying to use these AI detection tools, which are fundamentally broken, right? Like it's actually impossible. Like they have some amount of ability to detect AI, but there are both plenty of false positives and false negatives. Some schools are trying to think about how do we shift towards teaching responsible AI use and so on. So I do think there is a brewing crisis here. And I just wanted to make an important distinction before we dive in here, Chris. We're talking about how important it is for people to know how to use AI. And now I'm saying, oh, we've got this brewing crisis in education because students are using AI to do their assignments. And I think there are two very different things that are a massively important distinction. One is outsourcing your thinking to AI, right? That's what a lot of these students are doing. They're taking a prompt, which is the assignment prompt that's been given to them by their teacher, feeding it into AI and turning in the result, right? And that is cheating, first of all, but also as a student, you're learning nothing. And so you're not gaining those valuable skills. Whereas what we were talking about in the previous segment, Chris, was learning those critical thinking skills, learning that sort of way of expressing yourself and understanding the problem domain and so on, so that you can feed it into the AI and get massive leverage on your executive function. So one is outsourcing to the AI. You're in a sense excluding yourself from the system. You've made yourself useless. And that's what a lot of these students are doing. They're not learning. They're not using AI in any meaningful way. They're just feeding a prompt into it that they didn't even write. And the other is gaining massive leverage by knowing how to use AI effectively. And that's what we need to be teaching in schools. And that's ironically what this AI tool usage is precisely undermining, that type of critical thinking problem definition that is actually going to be the most valuable skill for the current generation of students.
Let me give you a counter argument to this. There's a lot of kids that you meet in school or maybe met in your high school who are super lazy, but because of their laziness and their pragmatism, actually end up being really, really smart, really effective entrepreneurs who found the best, shortest path from here to there. And you can kind of just think back to all of the hardworking kids who understood how to become part of the institution and part of the bureaucracy and became really great little worker bees. And if you asked any of my teachers back at school, is Chris a good student? They would say, Chris is really smart, but he's really fucking lazy and doesn't pay attention.
I still say that.
Yaniv still says that. And the fact is because I was bored. I thought it was bureaucratic. I thought it was mostly nonsense. And I was too busy dreaming up my own startups and my own work. And I didn't want to go to college and I didn't want to go fit into the worker bee culture. And so you have to be careful about the people who are finding shortcuts from calling them, potentially ineffective or lazy, because they may be the ones who actually know how to lean on the AI the most. And let me just give you one last example, and maybe I'm just justifying my own laziness. I now just give every contract to ChatGPT and I just ask it, is there any reason why I shouldn't sign this contract? and it just like summarizes all of the, adversarial stuff and all the reasons why it's hostile to me. And I don't read the fucking contract. I just ask ChatGPT to tell me what's wrong with it.
That's fine because you're not a contract lawyer, right? If you're at university studying to be a contract lawyer and that's how you do it, well, guess what? You've done yourself out of a job because ChatGPT is doing all the work. You've learned nothing about contract law or how to review a contract. And I think that's the problem. And that's the difference.
There aren't going to be any contract lawyers left yet, Ev.
That's a different point, right? So what do we teach? What do we teach is a set of skills. And the skill is not, hey, I've been given an assignment by my teacher. I'm going to put it into ChatGPT. I'm going to take the output and submit it as my own work, because you've learned precisely nothing then. You have acquired no skills. And, so I think that means that the type of work that is being assigned to people needs to change. And, I think about, I'm in my 40s. When I was at school, the big debate was about whether students should be allowed to use calculators. For the young kids, a calculator is like a phone, except the only thing it can do is add and multiply numbers. Of course, learning arithmetic, learning how to add, learning how to multiply is actually a really core skill. And so, where things have settled is you don't allow calculators in primary school when learning those fundamental skills is actually really important, because then you won't learn them. But in high school, once those skills have been learned and you're applying arithmetic to higher order problems, you can effectively prompt the calculator with that sum and it will do it for you. And so that's where things have settled in general, right? Calculators are permitted in higher years, but not in earlier years. And I feel it's the same thing, right? Actually, Chris, I wanted to, this is something that I don't know if I'm coining it. I think I might be, because I haven't seen it. And again, I'm in Steve Jobs mode at the moment in his little world. And one of the things, very humanistic things to our earlier point, that Steve Jobs said about his computers in the 80s, in the early days, is he said he sees a computer as being like a bicycle for the mind, right? So in other words, it's not replacing the human mind. What is a bicycle? It's something that takes human muscle power and allows you to apply it more efficiently to go at a higher speed with less energy expenditure, but you're still putting in your own muscle power. So he saw a computer as a bicycle for the mind. What I think AI is it's a freaking race car for the mind, right? Like we've taken that bicycle for the mind thing and saying, okay, now you're getting even more for your brain power, but you still have to apply the brain power to get the value from it Otherwise, you are putting yourself into irrelevance, right? And so the question is, okay, so if a computer is a bicycle for the mind, maybe a calculator is a skateboard for the mind. Now we have this race car for the mind. How do we bring that into school so that people still learn those actual skills? They're still applying their mental power. They're still developing those mental skills that allow them to drive that thing effectively.
All right, those are our thoughts on AI and education, but we want to know what you think. So jump down in the comments and let us know your thoughts. Before we wrap up, we got to address the Bitcoin in the room, the cryptocurrency surge in the room. Bitcoin has, of course, hit all-time highs in the last 7 to 14 days. It's been a beautiful little run-up. My crypto wallet is very happy. I think it hit something like 111,900 USD per coin. This is obviously getting all the long-term hodlers very excited. And it continues to bode well for Bitcoin as a store of value. It's probably driven by a few key things, right? There are now big investors buying Bitcoin through legit Wall Street channels like ETFs, and they're buying a lot. There's a steady buying pressure. There's less Bitcoin being created now because of the halving, and even fewer coins are available on exchanges. People are buying, holding, and taking them off exchanges. As the US economy gets shakier, people are moving their money out of government bonds and into assets like Bitcoin. Oh my God, the US government bonds story is a disaster. If you're not following that, Google it. There are obviously political shifts and regulatory shifts changing things in the US with Trump and David Sachs and all those guys being super bullish on Bitcoin and passing real regulations. And then ultimately there's it's a huge hype cycle, the momentum trade. As it goes up, more people want to buy, the more it goes up. Yaniv, I know you are a lot more skeptical about Bitcoin than I am. I hold quite a few coins. What do you think about this? What do you make of all this? What happens next?
Look, I have a little bit of Bitcoin. I'm skeptical about crypto as a technology. I think it's kind of nonsense. But I think Bitcoin has become its own kind of asset class. I don't even really think of it as crypto. That's just an underlying technology. That it's a mimetic asset class. It's it's like a meme stock, like GameStop or something. It has clearly acquired momentum as something that is a scarce store of value. What defines a store of value is that if people think it is a store of value. And so, yeah, I think it's absolute enforceable, mathematically provable scarcity is a really nice feature for this thing. And yes, in a time of economic instability, the price of gold has been shooting up. So it doesn't surprise me that the price of Bitcoin has been shooting up too. My view, not investment advice, is that holding a little bit of Bitcoin as part of a balanced investment portfolio kind of makes sense these days, in the same way that some people hold gold. But it's still a risky asset. Would I be surprised to see it continue to perform well over the next 10 years? No, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I agree with you to one degree, but I disagree with you a little bit on one particular point. You called it like a meme stock, like a GameStop. And I think that's, strictly speaking, a little dismissive. I think the meme stocks are associated with temporary hype cycles that are overinflated and are bound to pop. I think it's a meme stock in the sense that it's a meme. It's an idea that evolves over time and that it is now firmly entrenched in our cultural consciousness. But I don't think it's temporary or overinflated. I think it's fake or pure concept in the same way that any money or any store of value is fake. Like, why is gold valuable? Because it's valuable.
Yeah.
Like the idea that we need to dig shit out of the ground because it's shiny and scarce and that is somehow valuable is laughable at this point, right? It's valuable because we all believe it to be valuable.
That's my point, right? It's mimetic.
Yeah, I understand. What I'm saying though is it's dangerous to call it a meme stock because that suggests a certain kind of thing, which is it's a hype curve and it's overinflated and it's just sort of for fun. Whereas I agree with you, I disagree that it's a meme stock, but I agree with you that it's mimetic, meaning that it is about consensus, and the consensus is that it is valuable, and that consensus seems to be durable. And so there's a subtle but important difference between those two things.
Well, here's a funny thing, Chris. Like, I just looked up the value of GameStop. This is an aside, but I think it's interesting. Its current share price at the time of recording is $35 US, which is up 3,366% over the past 5 years. And if you look at the graph, basically since it became a meme stock it has held its value within 50%, right? So weirdly, GameStop does seem to have become an enduring store of value because of its mimetic value, right? And there's a serious point here, right? Which is that at a certain point with these things, you either value something off its fundamentals, which is like its ability to generate income fundamentally, or you value it mimetically, where you say it's valuable because everyone else thinks it's valuable. And yes, I think Bitcoin is a superior store of value to GameStop stock, primarily because it's not beholden to a stock exchange and doesn't have a board and, all sorts of weird things that might distort that pure store of value. But the truth is, both Bitcoin and GameStop have been perfectly good places to stash your money over the last 5 years.
Yeah, look, that's fair. I don't think all the other meme coins and meme stocks have fared so well as GameStop, but that is a funny fact. I would say, though, that like most technology, it's hard to categorize it. Right, like is Facebook a communication platform or a media company? Is Bitcoin gold or is it currency? Is it mimetic or is it underlying value and utility? And I would argue that Bitcoin straddles both worlds.
It has no utility. It has less utility than gold for sure.
So I disagree with you. Putting aside, using gold in whatever, in like electronics or something, the gold is heavy. It's hard to transport. It's hard to measure. It's hard to fractionalize. It's hard to verify. Gold is terrible as a transportable store of value.
Yeah, but we're talking about utility, dude. You said disregarding the utility, it has no utility. Its utility is it's a valuable commodity that is useful in a whole bunch of applications, which Bitcoin is not. What you're saying is that Bitcoin has some attributes that makes it a better store of value in the current world. But that is not utility. That's circular reasoning, right? You're just saying it has utility as a store of value because it's a store of value. Outside of that, I would say it has no utility.
It's circular in the sense that, yes, its ultimate utility is in being a better store and transfer of value. So I guess it's circular in that sense. But if its job is to store value and ultimately transfer value, and it is very, very good and has high utility in doing that, in the idea that you can transport that value and confirm it and fractionalize it and trace it and log it. I mean, that in my mind is utility enough. And then you add the utility of it being disentangled or unbundled from governments, from financial systems, from regulatory systems in a way, because it still is susceptible at the point of fiat and the point of taxation. But I think this is an enormous amounts of utility. Yes, the utility seems to be in the domain of being a great store of value, an exchange of value, but I don't think that invalidates the utility in and of itself. It's pure. It's pure in the sense that it's purely digital, and it's pure in the sense that it is designed to be brilliant at what it does. And I think that's the short of like cleverly designed plastic money that like Australia and Europe make. It's sort of one of the first brilliantly designed stores of value, fit for purpose. And I think that's just elegant and beautiful. And I'm excited by it. I continue to be excited by it. And I do think it'll become one of the primary substrates of the financial system globally forever. And so that's exciting to me.
That could well happen. I'm tempted to continue to play word games with you about the meaning of utility here, but I think fundamentally we're agreeing. So I will leave it. What do you guys think? Is Bitcoin going to be the future, or is it just a meme stock that is moments away from crashing? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.
And I can tell you why you're wrong. All right, guys. Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks for joining us. Let us know your thoughts about all the topics, about the show, about anything you'd like to see us cover in the future down in the comments. We'll join you down there. And as usual, Yaniv, how can people find you on the internet?
Okay, well, I'm on LinkedIn trying to make it a less boring place. I love getting connection requests from TSP listeners. I had a couple just this morning, so just connect with me, let me know you're from TSP, and I will accept your request. How about you, Chris?
Yeah, you can add me on LinkedIn. Let me know you're from the show as well. Otherwise, you can find me on all the social media at Chris Sard and on my newsletter, chrissard.com/newsletter. All right, guys, catch you in the next one.
All right, see you later.
Bye-bye.